This story of mine comes from perhaps the worst period of my entire life so far. I grew up privileged. Summers in the Hamptons and winters in the Bahamas kind of privileged. My dad was an investment banker, and a good one at that. So much so that Mom never had to work after they got married. I had it all. Fancy private schooling led into what I thought would be a free college education. Well, not exactly free since Dad was footing the bill, but I'd never be saddled with any kind of crippling student debt that would turn my peers into wage slaves for the rest of their lives. At least, that's what I thought was going to happen, until the 2008 financial crash. A lot of other financial companies got government bailouts, right out of the taxpayer's pocket, but my dad's didn't. For whatever reason, they didn't qualify, so he lost his job. Long story short, one day I was in college, living the good life. The next I was on the phone to my mom, being told I'd have to drop out and find a job if I ever wanted to be able to support myself, as they just didn't have the spare cash anymore. It was devastating. I'd never worked a day in my life before, and there I was, traipsing around town with a folder full of resumes, trying to find something, anything, to get some cash in my account. And that's how I ended up working at Burger King. It was really hard at first. Although I didn't necessarily feel like it, I obviously gave off some major rich girl vibes, as the rough, tough, working-class staff members detected it immediately. They didn't go easy on me, not in the slightest. But if I'm honest, that's the best thing that could have happened to me. In the space of about 3 months, I learned the meaning of a hard day's work, and the more I threw myself into the challenge of full-time work, the more my colleagues started to respect and appreciate me. In the end, we were incredibly tight, and I still keep in touch with a few of them via Facebook and stuff, but anyway, now that you have a bit of background, on with the story. So I was working the late shift one night, which is generally the hardest shift of the day. The manager only ever put the most competent, most capable workers on that shift, and I know it sounds dumb, but the fact that I'd proven myself enough to be put on that cycle was a huge compliment to me. We used to stay open until midnight on weekends, and at about 11:30, we get this pretty regular-looking dude coming in, standing there at the counter whilst perusing the menu behind me. I gave it my best. "May I take your order, sir?" He looks down at me. Without skipping a beat, he's like, "2 double cheeseburgers, please." I could have plugged the order into the register when he interrupts me with an addendum into his order. "Could I have those without the bun, the bacon, or any cheese, and hold off on grilling them for me, would you? Thanks." I stopped plugging his order in and looked up at him. "Excuse me?" It took a moment for me to really process what he was asking for, and he smiled as he began to clarify what his order was. "Is there a problem?" Yeah. I'm not sure we're allowed to serve raw hamburgers. It's against food safety regulations." "You've heard of steak tartare, haven't you?" Yet another guy who immediately detected something in my mannerisms or accent that suggested I was upper class. I didn't even justify it with a response. I just asked him to wait a second while I talked to my supervisor. So the supervisor comes out and basically tells the guy no, just like I had. Even if you can eat raw beef, it's just not something we're able to serve our customers, or that's what I thought anyway. Because as my super is talking to this guy, calmly explaining that as much as he's sorry, it's just not something we can do, the guy rolls his eyes and pulls out a wad of high-denomination bills from his pocket and is just like, "How much would it take?" Now the place is pretty much empty at this point, but all eyes are on this guy and his wad of bills. I'll never forget the moment my supervisor stopped talking all calm and professional before turning to me and telling me, "Go to the back and clean something." I was stunned. I knew the guy well enough to know exactly what he was doing. He was going to clear the floor of potential witnesses, then actually get this guy's order. I pretended to clean something, all the while spying on him as he collected 2 raw patties from the fridge and sort of went through the motions of cooking them, so that if anyone watched the cameras back, it would look like he had done his job to the letter. A couple of minutes later, he comes into the back, telling me to take over the register, but not before he slides a few crisp $100 bills into my hand, telling me not to say a word to anyone and to just forget about what had happened before people start running their mouths about it. As far as the rest of the team knew, he had told the guy no, served him some regular burgers, then simply gone about the rest of his shift as normal. But I couldn't let it go. I had to get some closure, even if I had a few $100 worth of tips. I had to know what this guy's deal was. So being the sly fox that I am, I ducked my supervisor and hit up the manager in his office, asking him if, since it's so quiet, it'd be okay if I took a cigarette break. He looks at me all confused, turning in his chair before saying, like, "You don't smoke, do you?" Yeah, I just started. Stresses of the job." "Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but you're entitled to your 5 minutes. Just make sure you get your station covered." So I did. I got a buddy of mine to man the register, bummed the smoke off of one of the fryer guys, then stood out back trying to get a look at the guy as he headed for his car. So there's me, standing there, pretending to smoke while I pretend I'm not watching this dude climbing into his driver's side. Then the thought hits me. It's late. Stores might not be open. In fact, they definitely weren't open, and the dude probably wanted something to cook with, right? Wrong. I distinctly see him unwrap the dripping wet burger wrapper before he raised the raw meat to his face. He doesn't take a bite, not like I expected him to. In fact, it looks more like he's smelling the meat more than anything else. I really couldn't believe what I was seeing. Literally, though, I thought the perspective had me seeing something that I wasn't, so I made the awful decision to edge a little closer to the car, angling out so I could see through the driver's side window, all without considering that his side mirror would reveal me as the peeper that I was. And oh my God, the way he looked at me through that window, this wild look in his eyes after breaking from what looked so much like he was making out with that chunk of meat. He was furious, gunning his engine before ripping out of the parking lot as fast as he could move. I just tossed the cigarette, ran back inside, and went straight to the super to tell him what I'd seen. He only repeated that no matter what, I wasn't to tell a soul that we'd served him raw meat, or those few $100 bills would be the last money we ever got out of this place if the owner didn't opt to sue us too. We never saw that guy ever again, and no one ever found out about the raw meat we sold him. I don't suppose I was in any real danger, but it was definitely the scariest, if not the most disturbing incident I've ever had while working at Burger King.
Hey guys, it's Rye Horror. It seems like many of you guys enjoy my animated stories, but only 27% of you are subscribed. If you want to see this channel hit 10k subs, then please like and subscribe. Now back to the show.
I was a pizza delivery driver for 8 months here in Midtown Detroit. It felt like years. I've had some real terrible jobs since I dropped out of college, but being a delivery driver was by far the worst thing I've ever had to do for money. It goes way beyond just being talked to like a moron by some heavy-set Armenian shop owner, or being screwed out of a tip by some white trash bimbo who lies about the lateness of her order. I've been robbed, beaten up, and almost killed while on the job. The first time was when I was delivering to an apartment building over near 8 Mile. I had just gotten out of my car and was grabbing the pies from the back seat when I saw this group of teenagers approaching my car. They start making jokes about how beat up my old Taurus was, and I'd be lying if I said they had no grounds to. That thing was a complete rust box. They're talking trash, I'm giving as good as I get, and it seems like it's just a bit of fun. That's when I feel one of their hands in my pockets, trying to grab the folded stack of dollar bills I use for change. I'm mad. But when I turn, one of the kids has this huge knife out, telling me to hand over the cash. I just kind of reacted. I hurled the only thing I had available to me right at the knife wielder. Now, I didn't expect this, but as I throw the pizza box, the thing just sort of falls apart in midair, freeing the pie up to land right on the kid's face. I always knew our shop had a reputation for delivering piping hot pizza. I guess that's why it's so busy. But the way that kid was screaming when practically molten hot cheese was getting stuck to his thieving face, wow, it was ear-splitting. I saw that same kid a few days later. He had a bandage over the side of his face the pizza hit, and I'd be lying if that didn't make me smile. It wasn't even the robberies that were the worst, though, because a few years back, something started happening to pizza delivery drivers here in Midtown that's like something out of a horror film. A big part of gang initiations around here is taking a potential member out to jump someone. But since they were doing this in public, the cops got wise to it pretty quickly. After trios of scumbag Cripper blood clones were getting locked up on the daily, the gangsters decided to smarten up a little. God knows whose idea it was, but some way, somehow, someone must have had the idea to ambush delivery drivers after luring them to abandoned spots throughout the city. The first I heard of this was a guy from another shop getting a call to a quiet, mostly derelict neighborhood on the edge of town. He'd arrived at this big red brick house, walked up to the front steps, then had apparently seen a handwritten sign on the door that read something like, "Doorbell broken, come around back, tip in it for you." Tip. That's the magic word that must have done the trick. Pizza box in hand, the guy walks in the backyard of this big old house where he sees some kid, a pistol in his hand. No one knows just what went down, but it ended with a delivery driver being shot in the head and neck before their assailant stole nothing more than $20 in change in single bills. His funeral was about a month ago now. A few of the drivers at my shop stopped by to pay their respects, but I didn't. I kind of felt like I'd be imposing. Besides, I never mentioned it to anyone, but I always thought that the guy was an idiot. No one deserves to lose their life over a delivery job, but this was right in the middle of this whole gang initiation thing happening. Who drives out to an abandoned neighborhood after getting an order of any topping, any soda? After that, the shop I was delivering for started a blacklist of neighborhoods that were forbidden to delivery after dark. But even that didn't keep us entirely safe. A buddy of mine at the same shop managed to get himself jacked in the middle of the day, delivering to a fancy residential neighborhood. Some gang members had busted into a house whose owners were on vacation. He rings the doorbell, they pull him inside, then proceed to rob him of the maximum $20 in change. When he tells them truthfully that was all he had on him, they beat him half to death before stealing his car. He was in the hospital for a week while his jaw was wired shut. And that leads me to the last delivery I ever drove for Armin, the Armenian pizza place. The fancy townhouse beating my buddy suffered had me paranoid. Borrowing a .44 revolver from my buddy started me thinking that maybe I should just go ahead and quit. It was surreal in the extreme, being given a little rundown of how to load and fire the thing, where best to shoot someone if you didn't want to outright end their life. It felt like I was enlisting in the army or something. I had to remind myself this was a freaking pizza delivery job. So I rock up to the address I've been given, the 2 pizzas on the back seat, when I notice it's really quiet. There's a public park on the other side of the street, and thanks to a row of bushes, I can't see anything approaching from that angle. I get a bad feeling, like a really bad feeling, and take out the .44 from my glove box. That's when I see this dude emerge from the bushes on the other side of the street, and he's wearing one of those clown masks. This was right when all those attention-starved idiots were putting on clown masks and scaring people for the sake of getting that perfect viral video. But I didn't take the chance. I just started tapping on the glass with the revolver in hand, looking over at the guy with the gun plainly in view. He stops, takes one look at the revolver, and then reaches behind his back into his waistband. I just remember cracking the window and shouting, "Don't do it, man. Don't do it. You don't want to get shot." I'm not a particularly brave guy, but I don't know. The thought of ending up with a wired jaw, the thought of that poor kid who went out to work one night and never came home. I actually think I was ready to end this guy in the clown mask. He just wasn't a real person to me. He was a living embodiment of everything I hated about living in this freaking city. I kept the gun pointed at him as I drove away, the 2 pizzas still sitting in the back seat. I quit the moment I arrived at the shop. Armin didn't even act surprised when I handed him back my uniform and collected the money I was owed for the shift. It's been a while since I quit that job, but I still think about it most days. It's in the news all the time. Some driver getting robbed or beat or worse. Everyone seems terrified of automation right now, but it can't come soon enough for some jobs. Jobs that just aren't worth losing your life over.
Back when I was a teenager, I had a good friend from school. She told me that her parents would often fight. It gave her younger sister a headache, so much so that she would end up crying. Her house was dark because the only source of light was a burning lamp. In addition to this, there was an old painting that was of her mother's mother, a painting of a weeping child. One night, I went over for a sleepover at my friend's house. The next morning, I got up to finish off a school assignment. I then went to the kitchen to get a drink of water when I suddenly heard a child crying. But I didn't bother calling them because I assumed that it was my friend's sister. I went back to the room, but I couldn't sleep because I needed to go to the bathroom. The problem was that the bathroom was outside the house. I went over to the bathroom as courageously as I could, but once again, I could hear the crying, this time in the bathroom. I bolted inside the house as fast as possible. That's where I saw the dog barking aggressively at the picture. I just stared, frozen on the spot, when all of a sudden, the girl in the picture looked at me and started weeping. I ran to the room and screamed at my friend to tell her parents what I just saw. However, no one believed me, and instead, they told me that it was just a bad dream. A few months later, my friend came to tell me that her mother saw the girl in the painting cry as well, so she took the painting off the wall and burnt it to ashes. She also discovered that the artist had performed a ritual to curse the painting. The painting was of a child that he had abducted in order for him to paint them. After he was done, he handed them over as a sacrifice, and whoever had that painting, their house would be in the dark, and there would be no peace.